In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create this number 9 particle loop animation I created for 36 Days of Type. We'll be using the MoGraph Cloner and a bunch of effectors to create this. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see a tutorial for any of my other letters from this year's 36 Days of Type. Please remember to like and subscribe and you'll get notifications of when I upload new videos. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so I've got a new scene here, and the first thing I'm going to change is my project settings. I'm going to change this to 25 frames per second and 100 frames. So this is going to be a 4-second animation. The first thing I'll do then is bring in a MoText object, and this is just as a guide for what the shape of my 9 should be. I've been using the Big John font for the rest of my 36 Days of Type, so I'm just going to apply that one. And the reason I like this one is because it's got a well-defined circle and then this tail, so we can get this kind of swooping animation. To create the spline though, I'm going to use a helix. So if we bring a helix in, and then we'll scale that down, and then I'm just going to align it into the center of the 9. Okay, so just so it's lined up, and we can view an angle again. Now we don't need these multiple turns. I mean, you could do something with multiple turns. You could use any sort of spline for this, but for this one I just want one. So I want to kind of come up and loop round. So to do that, I just want a 360 degree, and then I am going to make the height of this something low, like 5. So we've just got this kind of loop that goes around. I'm going to make that editable. Go to point mode and then just select the last point in the helix. Go to the front mode, and then I'm just going to move that point down to the bottom. So we've got our kind of 9 shape, and because this is a Bezier spline, we can use this to kind of create kind of more of a curve. So let's make this kind of look reasonably nice. This doesn't need to be super precise because it's going to be made out of lots of spheres and particles, so we don't need to be too clean about it, but you know, it's nice to start off with something reasonably right. Okay, there we go. So now I can actually just delete the MoText, and there's our kind of rough spline 9 shape. Okay, so now I'll bring in a MoGraph Cloner, and the first thing we'll do is bring in a sphere, and I'm going to make that a radius of 1. Add that into the cloner, and we're going to change the mode from linear to object, and for the object we're going to drag in the helix. So now we've got our spheres kind of aligned to the spline, but they're not evenly spaced, because if you look at our original helix, obviously we've got all these points here and then no points in between here. But rather than adding in additional points, we can actually just change the type of spline it is. So we go back and select the spline, we can change the intermediate points. At the minute they're set to adaptive, we're going to change that to uniform, and I like to set this to something like 100. And now you'll see that our spheres are evenly spaced on the spline. So now we can just set up the initial animation, because once we've set up the animation, we can then make all our adjustments and effects, and to see how that's changing the animation as we go. So with the cloner selected, I'm actually going to, on my first frame, under the cloner, see we have this offset. I'm going to create a keyframe, and then on frame 100, I'm going to change this to 100, create another keyframe. And then we'll see that the spheres are kind of moving and looping along the spline, but they're easing in and out at the moment. So if we go to the timeline, we can just make those linear points. So now we've got this looping animation already of these dots moving along the spline. Now I want to up the number of dots that we have, or spheres, so let's change this to 1000. And obviously that's just making an actual line at the moment, so we're going to add in some effectors. So with the cloner selected, let's go MoGraph effector, and we'll add a random effector to begin with. And then for the parameters, we'll just change this to 10, 10, and 10. So we're kind of keeping close to the spline. And as you see, when we press play, we can see that the animation is already going. For the scale, I'm going to tick uniform scale and absolute scale, and change the scale randomness to 2. So now we've got like a random selection of these dots. Now we're getting a lot of intersections on these, so you can kind of fix that a little bit by just adding in another effector called the push part effector. So let's go to Cloner, MoGraph effectors, and add the push apart. And this pushes each particle away from the other by this radius, which currently is 100, so it's obviously a huge number. So let's just put this down to something like 1. And you'll see if we move this up and down 1, see it's literally pushing them all apart. So we'll just go down to 1, and I think I might actually for this change this to scale apart. So if they're less than 1 together, then less than 1 apart, it will scale them down so they kind of all fit into the same space, if that makes sense. But I just like the effect, it just looks quite nice. So with that done, we can see that these are coming in and then the other particles over here are disappearing, but they're just popping in and popping out. We go over here, they just pop into nowhere and they pop out of nowhere. So to fix that, we're going to need them to scale in and scale out again, so we have kind of this smooth animation. So we can do that using a shader effector. So I'll just press pause on that for a second. Let's go to the cloner again, MoGraph effector. We're going to bring in the shader effector. Now what we want to do for the shader effector is just affect the scale. I'm going to change that to absolute and put this to -1. Okay, so obviously that scaled everything down to 0, so you can't see anything. So we want to be able to scale and bring that back in again. So to do that, we're going to use, on the shading tab, we'll select shader, and we're actually going to bring in a gradient. Now, as you can see, it's starting big here, and then it's getting smaller as it goes round. Now, if I press play, this could be an effect that you actually want, depending on what you're using this effect for. But we want it to start from nothing, get bigger, and end with nothing. So to do that, as you can see, the white is where it's being affected. So the more white there is, the smaller it's making our particles. So what we want to do is actually bring this down, and then we'll add in a couple more little color tabs here. We'll add in a white because we want it to be small at one end, and then we'll add in another one which will make black, and then we can kind of dial this in to scale in exactly when we want them to. Okay, so I'll maybe do that about there. You can see here, maybe change that to about there. We press play, and now we've got them scaling in from the bottom and scaling out at the top. So actually, for my daily render, I added in a few more layers of these particles, so we had kind of more going on. And I kind of cheated it a little bit, but I was just trying to get an effect that I thought looked nice. And then I kind of added in some other effectors to get some other additional movement. So how I did that is I just grouped everything, and I called this one front. And then I'm going to duplicate, call this back, and all I'm going to do is actually change the sphere size for the back section to 2, and then move those back slightly. So it's just to give us kind of more particles in the same sort of area, so kind of to make up the shape, so make it more bold. And you'll notice obviously the back section is random, but it's the same randomness as the front section. So to get around that, we can so these all relate to this cloner now because we've duplicated them all together. So on the random for this one, I'm just going to change the seed a little bit, and then also what I might do for the pusher part, because this one has larger spheres, I might change this to a larger number. Maybe that's too big. I do want them to kind of pad it out more. Okay, so something like that. Okay. And then we press play. See, that's more filled out. And then what I'm going to do is add a third set. And these are going to be the small particles that kind of go around the edge of the 9 altogether. So for this one, I'm going to change the sphere size to 0.2. My push apart, I'm going to leave at 1, and Then for the randomness, I'm going to make these 20, 20, 20. Okay. And for the object, for the cloner, for the count, rather than being 1,000, I'm going to put this down to like 300. Okay. So now we've got this outer kind of ring and the inner two sets of rings, but there's our kind of looping 9, which kind of looks like it's made out of all random objects, which I guess it is, but it is perfectly looping for us. Okay, so we've got a perfect loop. Now the next thing we can do is add a little bit of additional animation on the tail to make it like swoosh forwards and backwards, and then obviously in Octane did all the colouring, so they're all random colours, but within a range. So let's set up that swooshing on the tail, and then I'll look at the colouring. So for the tail, I'll just turn off the small and the back for now, so we're just working with the front. If we go to the cloner again, I'm going to add in another effector, MoGraph effector formula. Now, I mean, you can get some crazy effects just by adding this as is. That is currently changing the scale and the position, which is, it's obviously pretty crazy at the moment. Turn off the scale, we don't want that, we just want the position actually, and I'm going to change this to something like 20 and 10, and it still looks pretty bonkers, but what we're going to use is a fall off, so we can only affect that kind of base of the tail. So with the fall off selected, I'm going to get I think I'll pick a spherical field, and then I can scale this down and just use it just to affect that bottom section. Okay, so let's have a look at what that's doing. Something like that. Okay. And obviously you can change this to taste. I'm just going to hide that so we can just have a look. So there you go. So now we're getting that like swish at the bottom. It might be that that's too much, so we could just change the formula effector to be, I don't know, maybe like 10 by 10. So we've just got more of a subtle swish at the bottom. And then you can also change the variables here to kind of slow it down. So maybe we want to go 0.5 and 0.5 on the project time and frequency to kind of have less forward and backward motion. I think originally I actually had it 1 and 1, but you know you've got that there for an option if you want to make it slower. And I'll probably add that to these other fields as well. So now we've created that, we can just select the other cloners and drag that in there. Okay, so that's basically our full animation. So the next thing to do is just set this up with our random selection of colors. So let's set this up for Octane. I'm going to start off by creating the stage for the background. This is very simple. I kind of have used it many times, but I'll just show you how I do it. I'm just kind of create a square rectangle, and then I'm going to break that apart, make it editable. Go to point mode. We don't want to close the spline. And then if we just get rid of the points that we don't need, what we want to end up with is just this loop, which is for this L shape, which is for like an infinity curve. So using that, we can extrude. We'll extrude that by say like, I don't know, 1000. And that's our stage that we're going to set up on. And this is, I kind of use the same one all the time, but I just wanted to show you kind of how it's done. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's just set this up. So it's just sitting underneath the 9. Okay, like that. Now my render for Instagram is 1000 by 1250. And actually now's probably a good time to open up the Octane Live viewer, because I want to bring in a Octane camera. Let's go to the Octane camera. Now I want to change this to tele mode. And this is going to look exactly the same as my daily render, because obviously I'm doing it from scratch. But you get the idea. It's the same effects, but obviously the last one was created with completely random spheres, so it's never going to look exactly the same. Okay, but there it is basically in our scene with our background stage. Right, now we can add on some materials and lighting. So first thing I do is create the Octane material for the stage. Actually, what I'll do is just press the render button so we can see what we're looking at. We'll change this to path tracing. Okay, and I'm wondering whether the tail of this 9 should be a little tiny bit longer. Now I probably should have just set this up so they all were affected by the same helix, but I've set it up so it's this one. So I'm just going to bring this down a little bit more. Okay, and this is where you can quite easily kind of swap this helix out for any other shape. If you swapped it out, you'd still have all your same setup done, but it could be a wavy shape or a sphere, a circle, or a helix that is kind of spinning up. Okay, so with that done, we've got our path tracing on. I'm going to change the Octane settings so we're not going like super high for the moment. I'll just change it to 100 so it'll render very quickly. We'll create the background stage, so let's go to materials and we'll create an Octane diffuse, and for this I'm just going to do very simple. Under HCV I'm going to change this to, I've written it down, the colours that I used, 87, 39 and 83. Okay, and that was for this kind of lime pale green background. We'll call this stage. So now we want to create the random colours for the spheres themselves, and to do that we've actually got to make an amend to the random effectors that are applied to each of our cloners. So let's open these up and select the random effectors, and underneath the parameter tab we have this colour drop down, and currently colour mode is set to off. Now what we want to set that to is effector colour. So basically the random effector is affecting the cloner, so we're getting these random colours. So these are currently applied over here in our viewport, but we need to pull that information and apply that to our Octane material. Okay, so we've got to create an Octane material, then pull in that information. So let's create an Octane glossy material, and I'll call this spheres. Let's open this up, and we're going to go into the node editor. And the first thing we're going to do is pull in the that color shader, which actually is this, I think MG is for MoGraph, so MoGraph color shader. That's where we're going to basically be pulling this information when the material is applied to these. So actually, so we can see that happening in live time, let's drag that material onto each of these cloners so we can see that happening. So currently we're just white. And what we're going to do is add in a gradient, this red one, not the black one. I'm going to pull in this gradient. We're going to pull the plug the color shader into the gradient, and the gradient is going to get plugged into the diffuse channel. Okay, so then we can already see that this is creating a selection of black and white from this black and white gradient that we have down here. Okay, but I think I'd change that to one of the presets in my daily render. So if you just go to load presets, you've got all these different color presets, and you can set up any sort of gradients or colors that you want. But I think for this one I use this pattern 1. So we get this selection of colors, and if I go back to the material, I think I'll put the roughness something like 0.1. So just a tiny bit of roughness. So that's our color setup. So the next thing we want to do is just bring in HDR map for the lighting, and maybe a couple of lights as well, and then we'll set up. So let's save this. So what I'll do is fold these up, and we'll bring in a HDRI environment. It's currently turned black because it's pulling light from the HDR, which is currently black, 0 light. So I'm going to open up this Car Studio 2, which I got from the Pixel Lab. They do some great sort of kind of lighting setups, and I might turn the power up. Oh no, actually not on there. We go up one level. I want the power that's actually in the Octane HDR object. Turn the power up a tiny bit. we will actually change the Octane camera settings. I'm going to go to camera imager, and then I'm going to actually affect the lighting by changing the exposure and the gamma on my camera. So I'm going to change the exposure to something like 2.4 and the gamma, I don't know, 1.4 maybe, something like that. And then I'm going to change the response. Now these are like LUTs that you might have in Premiere or After Effects, and you can kind of scroll through these and kind of get different lighting effects, lighting setups. I think for this one I used this Advantix 200. Okay, right, I think this, I need to turn this right up, yeah, something like that. Okay, and then I think I'll put a couple of lights in. So I'm going to create a light and Octane targeted area light. And go to another view, and we'll just kind of move this around. I like to kind of just do like a simple left and right kind of setup. Up. And I'm going to take the power of that right down. I'll actually just scale the size of the light. Move it up, forward. I mean, this is just where you can play around. And obviously I'm not going to subject you to me doing this for a long time. Let's just get to a point where I'm kind of happy. Okay, something like that. Okay, there you go. So there's basically our final setup. What I'll usually do is render it out. I have a workflow video where I talk about how I do this, but render it out, and then I'll usually take it into After Effects and do a bit of tweaking with color settings before I do my final render out from there that I'll upload to Instagram. But I hope you found this useful. I'm sorry there's been a delay in getting this video to you, but I'm hoping to ramp it up again and be a bit more regular with outputting the videos. But I hope you enjoyed this, hope you found it useful, and I will see you next time. Please stay safe. Bye.